I think our bodies are extremely good at going from 0 to 60, but we're not as good at going from 60 to 0 without actually having a breakdown.
And so I want to start off by asking you about this, because whether it's from recovering from exercise and getting that beautiful adaptation that we want, or whether it's healing from an injury, you share in the book that that process is really dependent upon our ability to shift over to our parasympathetic nervous system. That's where the healing really hits lightning speed.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I think our bodies are extremely good at going from 0 to 60 and like maintaining there. Like I'm a high stress person. I love just go. But we're not as good at going from 60 to 0 without actually having a breakdown. Right? A lot of people just crash. They're so exhausted, they fall on the couch with the TV on and pass out. And that's not really recovery. Right? So how can we improve our recovery endurance? How can we tolerate being in relaxation states that do help with tissue turnover, with the correct hormone balance, with tissue repair, all of that? What can we do for ourselves that isn't just, being left for dead all the time after we've burnt ourselves to a crisp? So what the book really does is it tries to amplify novel ways that you can increase your parasympathetic tolerance. And so there are 4 main tools that I focus on: breathe, roll, which is self-massage, move, and then non-sleep deep rest, or yoga nidra. And this is like a compound pharmacy that truly makes you feel like a massive difference, body-wide difference, that will end up actually making you even better at your sympathetic output.
Yeah, and all of this is tied to better outcomes with obviously our performance, but also surprisingly with our mental health, our emotional well-being. And we'll talk about all that stuff, of course. But I want to share this direct quote from your book.
Okay.
You say that our bodies come wired with an exquisite relaxation response. And that's kind of counter culture or counter paradigm. Like you just said, we're really good at going 0 to 100 or 0 to 60.
120.
But going the reverse is a lot more difficult, but it's not supposed to be like that. Your body actually has a system built in to kind of reverse engineer that stress. So I want to ask you about this. You say that our breath is our built-in reset button. All right. When I think of a reset button, I think of the first Nintendo. Super Mario Brothers just came out as of this recording. All right. And there was like 2 buttons: power, reset.
Yeah.
All right. But we have a built-in reset button for all of this stuff, and it's our breath. Why is that?
Your breath will breathe for you whether you pay it any mind or not. It's amazing. It is this completely automatic thing that's happening up to 22,000, 24,000 times a day, depending on who you're citing. But if we are able to consciously control the rhythm of our breath and the cadence of our breath and how we're breathing, you can change your brain. You can change state. And it happens within just a few moments. So there's wonderful research by, I highlight in the book, by Jack Feldman, who's actually a local neuroscientist. He's at UCLA. I mean, he's literally like just over the hill. And I know you live in Sherman Oaks. He used to live a mile from you. Anyway, so Jack Feldman discovered in the brainstem the 2 different places that generate inhales and exhales. They didn't know where these were located until 1991, or they didn't know where inhale was coming. They knew it was coming from the brain, but they didn't know exactly where in the brainstem. So he found this location called the pre-Botzinger complex. But one of the things that he found was that the initiation for inhale is coming from there, but that initiation doesn't just go to the nerve that directs the diaphragm to contract. So the diaphragm contracts because a nerve called the phrenic nerve is telling it to contract. The diaphragm, which is your main breathing muscle. Like any skeletal muscle, it needs a nerve to say, all right, contract now. So when this pre-Botstinger complex, or when the nerves within that tell the phrenic nerve to contract, they're also sending signals to lots of different parts of your brain. They're sending signals into areas that control emotion. They're sending signals that are also involved with the olfaction system, which makes a lot of sense, right? Our olfactory bulb. So they're going to many, many places throughout the brain, and they're also generating brain waves. Breathing has its own brain wave oscillation that's happening all the time. So it's not just affecting your ability to breathe in and out. Those brain waves are doing things to different parts of our brain that right now nobody really knows what those things are. But it seems pretty important that for some reason it's kicking off these waves that are happening all over the place globally. But one of the things that we know is if you change the rates of inhales and exhales, and there are a number of studies that have looked at them, but not like we still need a lot more breath science. And I think we're in the new age of a burgeoning time of breath science to be able to learn more and more what are the ideal patterns that help certain individuals. And obviously there's never one thing that works for everybody. But you can change your moment-to-moment experience by adjusting how it is you're breathing. And that's really, really powerful. But I don't want you to get lost in your head about breathing, because breathing is a body-wide experience, which is why I wrote the book, Body by Breath, not Brain by Breath. I mean, the brain is super important, but breathing is really a body-wide experience that affects literally every system and structure of your body.
All right. So there's a couple of things here. Number one, when you mentioned that research, and it stuck right out to me, in effectively finding the breathing pacemaker is what you referred to it as in the book.
Yeah, he wouldn't call it a pacemaker. That it's really interesting.
But that's kind of what it is.
It seems like it's a pacemaker, but a pacemaker is bump, 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 bump. Breathing is more erratic than that, because it's not only is it happening because it's happening, but it's also responding to the environment outside of you and to the environment inside of you. So it's very labile. It's changing. It's very mercurial.
It's a pacemaker that we're setting at different places.
Yes, it's setting itself because it's happening unconsciously. You start walking and then all of a sudden you hear a screech of car tires and your breathing changes suddenly. It is so responsive and reactive. You don't even have to make that happen. That's happening for you, right? So it is a facile pacemaker that is constantly variable.
Yeah, and what's unique about this system and this access to this reset button essentially is that being this part of the autonomic nervous system that's just doing this, whether you're paying attention to it or not, we can sort of jump in and grab the steering wheel.
Beautiful.
Right? And start to drive the system to a different place. But I don't think a lot of us have been given access or given the awareness that we have this access. It's innate to us, you know, just being human and having consciousness, that we have this ability to instantly shift how we're feeling, what's happening. You just said this also, it's body wide. One of the things that I experienced, and I'm still, even when you were speaking, the exercise that you took me through before we got started today, what I'm experiencing right now, when you mentioned the olfactory thing, like my sinuses, like, you know, sometimes they'll switch lanes, right? You got one side, it's kind of wide open. The other one is just kind of, you know, it's a toll booth over there. Yeah. But I got double holes going right now, like big time.
So he's talking about nasal laterality. So what's this really weird thing about the human body is, depending on your body, but every 90 minutes to 4 hours, we switch nasal dominance. And so, but right now he is, you know, broadly open on both sides of his sinuses, but we didn't do anything directly for his nose. What I taught him was something to decompress his low back and to exercise his diaphragm within the low back. And all of a sudden, your face and the channels of breathing are more open. That's amazing.
That is bananas in pajamas, for real. And this particular exercise on page 67 in the book, you actually cited a couple of times because it's so remarkable. And you also make sure that it's an easy on-ramp for people. You know, can use stuff around the house to kind of position this. And, you know, the cues that you gave me were just so awesome. And these cues are throughout the book as well. That's what's so special about this book, is that you're giving us this insight into our anatomy, but also these mental cues that really makes it sticky, you know. And so I want to ask you about this, because this is very likely the most important muscle that we don't train, the most important muscle that we're not really informed on. This might be the most important muscle. And you said it already, the diaphragm. All right. So please give us a masterclass understanding on the diaphragm as a muscle.
The respiratory diaphragm is, in my opinion, the most significant skeletal muscle in the human body. It is the hub around which all of your body orchestrates itself. It's this odd-shaped trampoline-like semicircle locked into your rib cage. And if you've ever eaten skirt steak, by the way, you've eaten cow diaphragm. So that might be a reference point for some people if they're meat eaters, right? The skirt steak, it looks like a skirt, looks like a big hoop. And you have a right-sided and a left-sided diaphragm. You have the right side rib cage, left side rib cage. So we have a little bit of difference on the right and left side just to accommodate the shape of the liver. On top of your respiratory diaphragm is your heart. So your heart sits directly onto what's known as the central tendon of the diaphragm. So as you breathe, your heart is always going along for a ride with the diaphragm. The diaphragm also attaches to your lumbar spine. And so a lot of people with low back pain, one of the very conservative and smart things to start doing is to do deep breathing because of that relationship. But the diaphragm is attached to so many different tissues, both above and below, that are instrumental in generating core strength, postural integrity. The diaphragm itself is a passageway. I mean, diaphragm actually means partition. And so it's a passageway that allows for the input of food to be able to go down into this sort of, I don't want to say dirty, nasty area, but you don't want all this stuff coming up and getting into your lungs. So the diaphragm acts as a partition and a passageway to separate lungs and heart from visceral organs. The diaphragm is also a pump. It is constantly moving down and up as you breathe. And this pump action that the diaphragm has, it's like bouncing your organs below it. By the way, if your diaphragm weren't there, your organs would just kind of float up into your throat and out your eyeballs. It would be a mess. So the diaphragm acts as a gatekeeper to make sure that your organs stay where they need to be. And of course, if anybody is listening has a hiatal hernia, you know how problematic it is when your organs start to float up within the diaphragm. Your stomach pooches up, and it's a miserable condition. So, oh my goodness, I'm doing a laundry list of things as they're popping into my brain right now. So the diaphragm helps to generate force for pushing matter out, right? So we use it to bear down, to have our bowel movements. We use it to urinate. We use it to cough, to get things out of our lungs. So it's moving stuff that's in the visceral region out into the toilet, or a baby out into the world, right? Or it's generating forces that can help move fluid out of the lungs. And obviously the diaphragm became very important in the last 3 years when people were having this, insane amount of lung infection due to the pandemic. So one of the really cool things about the diaphragm, I think that everybody should probably know, is related to aging. So your diaphragm is equipped with some of the most special muscle fibers known to the human body. I mean, your diaphragm is the one skeletal muscle that will go on contracting even if you're passed out drunk, even if you fall asleep. It has to keep contracting in order for you to stay alive. There's no other skeletal muscle you have that's going to do that for you. So it has these very specialized fiber types that are so enduring. but it also has fast twitch muscle fiber types that help for generating tremendous force. For example, in the case of childbirth. I mean, we always think of the uterus, but you know what's upstairs of the uterus? Your diaphragm is contracting like crazy to help push the baby out. But you can't feel it. That's the thing about the diaphragm. It is devoid of sensory receptors. In fact, there's only about 6 of them, and they're located in the crura, the parts that connect to your lumbar spine. So you can't sit here right now, Shawn, and tell me where your diaphragm is. You could tell me where your bicep is. You can take your mind and you could crawl it to your biceps, and you're like, I know where my bicep is. I can tell how short it is, or I can tell how long it is. But you can't sit there and sense the location of your diaphragm. You were created in such a way that you don't have to worry about the 22,000 reps a day that your respiratory diaphragm does. And that can be problematic, because if your diaphragm is this is where I'm going to get a little bit on the body by breath. Your diaphragm may not necessarily be optimally being used in your body because of injury, because of the habit of posture, or because of our own emotional stuff. We may be short training our diaphragm from full range of motion. And our diaphragm can be better optimized, I'd say. I mean, culture has kept our bodies, in chairs and in front of computers, and we are more in a C shape now than we are in an S shape for the most part. And your diaphragm, I mean, you can breathe around that. Your airway will adapt to any shape. That's the amazing thing about this caster within your rib cage. It can accommodate any shape, and I can still breathe, right? But I probably don't have many options if I'm stuck in a single shape all the time, if I don't spread that tarp, spread the trampoline in all of the ways that it can move.
One of the things that I noted to talk about is you really changed my perception on posture just within a couple of sentences. But it was leading up. There were little things, you're planting seeds as I was going along. But you mentioned how posture is essentially a home base from which all of our other movements emanate, right? And inherently, it really hit me that the shapes that we put our bodies in, every shape, every move that we make, it inherently changes the way that we breathe or affects the way that we breathe. Mm-hmm. And so whether I'm laying on the floor, on my stomach, on my side, or hunched over in a chair, looking down, holding my phone, it's going to change the way that I'm breathing. And again, the vast majority of us, we never think about it. Our body is going to adapt, but the adaptation can compromise function. Mm-hmm. And we want to be more intentional about putting ourselves in position where we can open up functionality. Just like the experience of double nostril, full on oxygen partitioning that I'm experiencing right now, getting high on that O out here, and so it's really interesting to note this. And I want to ask you about this because when you just talked about some of the functions that the diaphragm's involved in, again, this skeletal muscle, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about it in that way. As a matter of fact, the diaphragm is largely not even in the conversation.
Not at all.
It's so disrespected. But you mentioned how this process of breathing, the heart is going along for the ride, right? So I want to ask you about this. What is the connection with our diaphragm, with our breathing, and our ability to shift what's happening with our heart rate, right? Because our heart rate, and you detailed it so perfectly, can elevate or reduce based on a variety of things, movement, exercise, stress, all these things, but we can change it. We can actually influence our heart rate by changing our breathing.
Absolutely. So these muscles, they're 2 different muscles, right? The heart muscle is a smooth muscle, and then the diaphragm is this skeletal muscle. By affecting the pace of breathing, by overtaking the quote unquote pacemaker, right? By no longer letting the automatic happen, but by deciding I'm going to breathe shorter and faster and shallower, I can get my heart rate to elevate. Or if I decide to breathe longer, slower, and deeper, I can slow down the heart rate. And this is because of the impact of a really famous nerve called the vagus nerve and how it fires upon the sinoatrial node of the heart and starts to let the heart either go faster if I'm removing the vagal input, or if I try to increase my vagal input by going into recovery-based states, which is what this whole book is about, I can start to slow down my heart rate. And really one of the fastest ways to do that is by using a stronger, longer exhalation versus versus a longer inhalation. So that's one of the fastest ways.
So when we breathe in, the heart rate is increasing?
Yeah, so this takes us into literally heart rate variability. So HRV is the odd variability that your heart has within itself, that when you're inhaling, the heart rate speeds up, and when you're exhaling, the heart rate speeds down. And this is happening all the time, unless there is no slowing down, right? If you are running from the tiger or you're running a race, your heart is going to be at its maximum heart rate. But as soon as you stop and you start to walk and you realize there is no threat or there is no longer a race, your heart rate will start to adjust to that vagal input. And once the vagal input shows up, we're going to have a very, very different wave on our heart. If we got a heart rate monitor, or if you're attached to an ECG, fun or not fun for some, you can see the changes in the beat to beat ratio depending on whether you're in an inhale state or in an exhale state. And it's a lot more complicated. It's outlined more clearly in the book, but the heart rate variability, the person who originally codified heart rate variability is Dr. Stephen Porges, and his work on the vagus nerve is highlighted in chapter 3 in a really big way. He's got a modern theory about the evolution of the vagus nerve called polyvagal theory. And this helps us to look at how our heart and breath and frankly, our whole nervous system relates in different states of arousal, defense, or life threat versus a recovery or relaxation response.
It's so fascinating. And as soon as you said that the heart is going along for a ride on that diaphragm trampoline, essentially, it just really made me realize that our heart is really kind of, as it's going along for this ride, that association, that kinship with these two really remarkable organs, and also the fact that they're both muscles. You know, we have the cardiac muscle and then the diaphragm being a skeletal muscle. It's just like they're really working together for movement within ourselves, and that inner movement is directly controlling our external movement, our outer movement. And it's really working is going to change our ability to work out.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
They're tithed together. They are the ultimate neighbors. And I mean, the heart, I say this in the beginning of one of the chapters, the heart has all the sonnets written about it. The heart is the muscle of love. It's what everybody champions. Oh, I felt that in my heart. But the diaphragm is like, it's not a doormat. It's not just like, hey, I'm not just the heart's bed.
I'm not in the friend zone.
I know, like, we're connected.
We done friend zone the diaphragm. What are we doing?
Not fair. So if only we could help children to connect with the muscle, they can actually change its cadence, and then they can change their mood. They can change the way their cognition is functioning. I mean, there's the ripple effect is unfathomable.
Specifically on that, when you're talking about how our breath is this internal reset button, you share this another quote from the book. It's both easily accessible and quite effective, and unlike anti-anxiety medications, recreational drugs, alcohol, and comfort food, it doesn't come with a laundry list of harmful side effects, because you were detailing throughout how shifting our breathing and being more intentional about this dramatically reduces our incidence of anxiety, depressive thoughts, and increases our resilience, which I want to come back and talk about resilience, because you define it differently than I think we're exposed to today. But also, this shift, changing over to our parasympathetic from the sympathetic, also increases powerful anabolic hormones like HGH, for example. Like we're kind of creating this tonifying, youth supportive chemistry and atmosphere in our bodies by shifting our breathing. And it's free.
Yeah.
It's free. And the side effects, like you just mentioned, we're usually going for, let me get a pill for that. Let me get an injectable for that experience that you already innately have access to. So let's talk about that.
Right, an injectable or an edible or a drinkable or whatever it is. Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, obviously, pharmaceuticals and other wellness by chemistry, there's totally a place for that. But, you know, part of my path as my own healing from a series of eating disorders in my teens and early 20s was really about finding my way through my body, because talk therapy wasn't working for me. Prozac, Zoloft, they didn't work for me. They took so much away from me that I wasn't able to really feel myself. And so finding ways of inhabiting my body and trying to create a dialogue between the parts of me that I didn't like and that I dismissed and I was trying to run away from or control, and welcoming them to the table was the path of going through these structures, touching these structures, just like what I had you do earlier. We did this very gentle, supportive thing on Shawn's low back called the lateral raphe, decompression of the low back via the lateral raphe using 2 Courgeous balls, but trying to find ways to welcome the anxiety body or welcome the pain body and start a dialogue in a really, really gentle, nurturing, supportive way. Not continuing to, dull or suppress the experience of those voices, right? Which I found that medication dulled them so much. I didn't know what they wanted to say to me, right? I mean, I don't know if you've had that experience with them. I certainly did. I became so dull to myself, I couldn't feel. And as a sensation junkie, it was important for me to be able to let them continue to speak. Yeah. So to your point, the side effects of using breath or using the type of massage tools or movement tools that I introduce in this book, you have this other side effect. The side effects are, oh, I don't have pain anymore, or, oh, my shoulder moves better, or, oh, I have this spontaneous upright posture. Where did that come from? That's all from coaxing your tissues and giving them a chance to no longer have to be imprisoned by unchecked stress. Because that unchecked stress, I mean, I'm going to walk out the door. I'm going to drive away. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, stress is mine to take or it's mine to dialogue with.
And to this point, when
Yes.
you talked about essentially covering up that alarm that's going off with depressive experience or depressive feelings, anxiety and whatnot, and essentially, and giving the caveat, of course, that our pharmaceutical model has its place for sure. However, when our body is giving us this feedback and we take a heavy weighted blanket and we're throwing it over this alarm that's going off, this internal feedback, this biochemical feedback that our body's giving us that, hey, we need to probably change, whether it's our behavior, whether it's as simple as changing the way that we're breathing, whatever the case might be, our bodies are giving us innate feedback. And instead, weighted blanket goes over the alarm, but it's still there. It's still going off. And as you mentioned, we can mask it and not experience what it's trying to inform us to do. And that's the culture that we've really co-created today, is where we are hiding from all these things and we're creating an atmosphere within our bodies that it's like a minefield, really, and so many of us are walking around with these exposed minds, and we bump into another person or another situation or another stressor and the entire system explodes, right? Instead of having this internal access, which for you, it was through tapping into and experiencing it through the body. As you just mentioned, I can't really put it to words, but after doing the exercise, and it's going to be different from person to person, of course. Not, I would imagine not everybody's going to have that double nostril jump off so suddenly. But also, what I said, the first thing that I said was I felt more of me. I felt that there was more of me in the room, and it's just like a very strange thing to articulate that.
Yes, there are these intangibles that happen. A big part of the book, there's 2 chapters on fascia. So let's talk about fascia, because that helps us to define this strange, intangible experience that you just had. Like, I feel more presence. What is that? Well, the 2 chapters in fascia, one of them just helps you understand fascia. The other one is on fascia and your sensing systems. And in fascia and your sensing systems, I go over the difference of proprioception, which is your body's knowledge of itself in movement or position. And then there's interoception, which is your body's ability to listen to its physiology and to make sense of that. So it's your subtle sensing system. So we have this gross sensing system with proprioception, and then we have this subtle sensing system with interoception. And what does that mean? So interoception helps us to know that we're hungry. We can feel the movement in our organs. We can feel the movement of air. We can feel the movement of blood. So, heartbeat, breathing, these are all interoceptive. Even sexual desire is an interoceptive feeling. But that strange thing you felt like, oh, there's just more of me. That's also interoception. Or the warmth that was generated from doing those gentle movements, the strange rolling warmth. Your awareness of more dual nostril breathing, that's interoception. So we're in Body by Breath, one of the big assists is to help bodies in this recovery based cocktail to dial into interoception and to try to parse out these unique experiences that are a part of all of us, but they're going to be the first ones that are subdued and smushed down because of the go of our sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system sometimes is running away from these deep feels within the body. So interoception is even the feeling of your emotions in your body. So it's so interesting, but just doing something that simple, that little tiny positional release allowed you to have buckets and buckets of soft, experiential, ephemeral, odd awareness.
Just hearing a little bit about, for somebody like yourself, when I get exposed to their brilliance, I'm just like, how in the world, what track could somebody take to arrive at this place, right? And the stories are typically, especially somebody who is displaying a certain level of excellence, it's very atypical. It is not what you would think. And you mentioned your tryst with various pharmaceuticals to try to address some of the things you were dealing with. But part of your entry into this field, which I would imagine when you were a kid, you did not see yourself doing this
No.
work that you're doing today.
Oh my gosh.
But you struggled with your perception of yourself,
For
right?
sure.
Your introception of you mightily, to the degree that you experience several diagnosed disorders. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I came at this, so I'll just say one thing. I wrote a book almost 10 years ago called The Role Model Method, which has been a bestseller. It details my self-myofascial release approach. And it really is a great way to address musculoskeletal issues, mobility issues. And it really is highly focused on this proprioceptive arrangement. This book is the book I wanted to write when I was approached by Victory Belt 12 years ago. When they originally met me, or they originally reached out to me, they had seen me on my friend Kelly Starrett's program on a platform called Creative Live. And I presented an hour seminar on fascia and an hour seminar on breathing. And the next day there was an email in my inbox that said, we want to publish your book. I said, well, I don't have a book. They said, we'll write one and we'll publish it. And so I knew that self-myofascial release was a rising trend and that I had something to contribute there. But I wanted to write about my core approach. But I knew that breathing wasn't trending 12 years ago, 14 years ago, only in the yoga space, which is where I was. And so I had to put all of that on hold till now. But my story of how I got into self-myofascial release in the first place, and why this is the book that really needed to get written, was I was a very overweight kid. I was a super chubby kid, very junk food eater. You were talking about this, earlier. And pinwheels, burgers after school, Hardee's roast beef. Like every day I would have a burger after school. I don't know how that happened. And French fries, the whole thing. But anyway, I was a really overweight kid. I was very short. I was 4'9", 100 pounds in 6th grade. So I was, very round, big, thick glasses because I was a reader, very inactive.
This was even more rare back.
You think?
Back at that time period, yeah. So you were probably sticking out.
Oh yeah. So I was that kid, but I was very smart, very bookish, and I guess I'm still smart and bookish, but I'm quite a different body now than I was back then. And so I figured out that if I stopped eating, and I got this idea from, actually it was like a TV show, one of those news shows Jane Fonda was on, like 2020 or something like that. And this word bulimia came up on the show. And they said that she would throw up what she ate. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I started starving myself, and I also eventually became bulimic. Now, I want to say something about that. When all this stuff happened, I was going to the library and checking out books on anorexia and bulimia because I knew there was something wasn't right about that. So I was learning about these diseases while I was engaged in them, but I couldn't stop. And the short version of the story is during college, I was still acting out, which is what we call it from the bulimia space. I'm still, binging and purging. But I was in the dance department and I had to take Pilates classes, and I got my roommate who was pre-med. I got her to take the Pilates with me, and she would always complain that she was sore after Pilates, and I was never sore. And I just didn't get sore abs because I didn't feel my abs. I couldn't feel them at all. I was using my limbs to get through the classes, right? You were limbing the exercises. And so one day I was also doing work study at a yoga studio or something. Somehow I was at a yoga studio. And I remember mentioning to the teacher that I couldn't feel my abs and that I was bulimic. I knew that these were connected. I knew that this sort of black hole of non-feeling was partly what was the drive for the bulimia. And she said, well, why don't you lay face down on this prop and breathe? And so she handed me this hamburger bun shaped sandbag. And this was a prop in the Iyengar yoga space. They used to use it for headstands. And it was very, very hard because it's made of sand. But I laid down on it on my abdomen. And when I laid down on it, it was absolutely unbearably painful. Just gnarly, visceral pain. Interoception, right? But that pain started to help me drain the emotions that were stuffed in there, the stuff I was running from all along. I finally had a cable of connection between my emotions and the physical feeling of disconnect inside my guts. And so I was like, this is unbearable, but this is amazing. Like there was something like dark night of the soul. Like there was something about that. I was like, this is going to help me. And so I started to roll up a hand towel in my dorm room, and I would roll this hand towel up and I'd move it around my abdomen like a honey bun. I'm from the South. We used to eat honey buns, and breathe every morning. And that's really what helped me to work my way out of the disconnection I had and into feeling and listening. It was like an amplifier. I was able to listen to the voices inside of me that I was afraid of, that I hated, that I was angry at, and start the process of healing. And then now I have this tool called the Gorgeous Ball, which is much more gentle and much, much more supportive than a rolled up towel or, a sandbag.
Hamburger sandbag. Ironically, is a hamburger.
Oh my goodness. Well, how
Look
about
at
that?
Look, full circle.
That is a connection.
That's what's going to happen here. When you're here with me, new revelation is going to happen because that's what you're doing for all of us as well. But listen, this is such a remarkable story because what you're opening up is this awareness for us that all of our cells have a deep intelligence and a memory, right? We talk about this phenomenon of like muscle memory, for example, but it's really our cells are highly intelligent and there's an innate learning capacity that they have, and they're also storing up experiences. And so in essence, you know, in a micro way, it creates a global situation where we're stuffing down these emotions and kind of hiding out and finding ways. Our bodies are also great at hiding stuff and adapting, right? Covering up dysfunction in order for us to keep moving forward, you know? And so when you made that analogy of that cable connection, I pictured Doc on Back to the Future, you know, right at that last moment, getting that cable connected, the lightning going through and being able to time travel, right? And you were able to access those memories and to associate with them and to process and all the things because you got everything online, you know, by going within. And so there are certain, essentially, and you share this in the book as well, there are certain buttons that you can push. You're always looking for ways like, how can I get into the system faster? How can I don't want to use the word hack here.
Use tap.
How can I tap?
Totally,
right?
I'm with you.
How can I tap in? Tap it in. Just give it a little tappy. How can I find access to this system?
I think I call it portals. Like there are these portals, right? And
All right, now we're on Star Trek now.
It is so
Beam me up, Scotty.
Well, you brought time space travel, and you brought Doc from Back to the Future, but there are these hotspots or these access points, and they're going to be different for everybody. I think I've found a few really universal ones, and I highlight them in the book, in the rolling chapters. But we are stardust. Oh my gosh, you really got me in the outer space. But I really had this disorder of interoception, right? I really wasn't able to hear or sense my physiology. I was so controlling of my physiology because I didn't want to feel the things that I thought would destroy me, right? And of course, there's lots of stuff in my past, and that's not all like in the book. Maybe someday all that stuff will come out in the book. But it was really important in order to meet myself developmentally. There's no way I would have been able to age healthfully out of that. I mean, I had to go through that. I had to go through my body and go through that process in my own way. Because honestly, at the time, therapy and talk therapy was all in the head. It wasn't talking to my body. I needed my mental health was not in my head. It was a body-wide issue, and it needed a body-wide way of being able to show up. And I think that's really true for a lot of people, a lot of bodies. It's not just something that we can extract by talking it out.
Yeah. We've
got to move, and we've got to be tapped into these parts that we have punished or thrown away or run away from.
Yeah, there's a statement that there are many paths to the goal, but when it comes to our bodies and our minds, we tend to find ourselves, especially if people have spent a lot of time researching this stuff and how to help people to recover from trauma and whatever the case might be. And it's this overarching belief that it is strictly through the brain, right? Mm-hmm. Strictly through the brain, or there's a difference between the brain and the mind, by the way, which we'll put Dr. Caroline Leaf's episode for everybody in the show notes. But the brain isn't just operating in isolation, right? And also in the book, you share something that was really remarkable, because now the vagus nerve is hot out there on the streets, you know, with the brain and the gut association, the gut-brain connection. But you say that it really should be the gut-brain connection, because the gut itself is functional as a brain and running processes without, you can cut that. You can cut the connection, and the gut is going to continue to function in many different ways to do its applications. And so being able to access these memories, this internal information through different ways, and understanding talk therapy, yes, valuable, and understanding that, conventional exercise and movement practices, yes, valuable, but there are other paths to the goal. And the methods that you're bringing about are remarkably effective for so many people, because we're storing up things in places that we often don't know, especially within this space, within this core complex, where all the party is happening. Not all the party, but we tend to think that it's all happening upstairs in our brain, right? So can you talk a little bit about this distinction?
Oh my goodness. All right. So, oh my gosh, where do we start? Pressure on parts is a very valuable therapeutic application. And what I mean by that is self-massage. So because we have been so like the brain is everything and all your thoughts and all the things. But as I illustrate with my own story, I was a talking head. I mean, my body was moving. I couldn't feel most of it. And so I needed, and I think many people need, something to illuminate the experience of sensation. Your body thinks and feels. You are a sensational being. We have so many sensory neurons throughout our body that are helping our brain to orient us to our environment. Recently, there was a recalculation of the number of sensory neurons in your fascial tissues. So previously, they thought there were maybe about 100 million sensory neurons in your fascia, and your skin, for comparison, has about 200 million, and your eyes have about 150 million sensory neurons. But this recalculation, which was done by this researcher, Martin Grunwald, basically concluded that there are 250 million sensory neurons in your fascial tissues, providing feedback about the proprioception and about the interoception and about temperature and pain and all sorts of things. These things terminate in your fascial tissues. Even you have terminations, obviously. I mentioned the eyes, the skin, there's terminations lots of places, but that makes our fascial tissues the largest sensory organ we have in our body. And so, your brain is everywhere in your body, right? I mean, it's calculating it up here, but my body thinks in feels. My body thinks by feeling. That's how my brain gets its thinking. And that's one of the messages that I broadcast in the book. Your body thinks and feels. And if we're cut off from feeling, we're really trapped. We're really trapped in our head and isolated from ourselves. So using tools to pressurize, to agitate, to traction, to promote touch brings us back to sensation, to being a somatic being instead of just being a heady, thinkany being all the time. And I'm really an advocate for people to be able to illuminate their sensate body as brilliant, and not to just discount, the rest of your body as a meat suit, and then all the good stuff is happening, bing bong up there. So that's why it's body by breath. There is a chapter on, brain by breath, but we've got a lot more going downstairs.
Since you mentioned this several times, but I really want to give a clear understanding of what fascia is.
Okay.
Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Fascia is one of the connective tissues within your body. It evolves out of the embryo in a part called the mesoderm. All right, let me clarify. You have lots of connective tissues. Your bones are a connective tissue. Your ligaments are a connective tissue. Did you know that your blood is a connective tissue? These are all different connective tissues that come out of the same layer in the embryo. But what your fascia is that stringy, cobweb-like membranous stuff that you see when you butcher meat, right? You see those white threads that travel through. But these white threads, they look white, by the way, because you've got oxygen hardening the collagen within them. And so all of a sudden it looks white. But these are like these translucent layers throughout your body. They give you your form and your shape. They suspend your cells from foot to face and everything in between. And as I mentioned before, they are highly nerve rich, and they are also highly rich in cells, in living things. Your fascial tissues have a number of different cells that live within them that produce the collagen that, oh my goodness, collagen. This is a wellness podcast. People love taking collagen. But there's this cell called the fibroblast that lives and tends and mends your fascial net. We often call it the fascial net. And the primary molecule of your fascia is collagen. There's also elastin. But that collagen and the elastin allows you to be able to have elasticity within your body. It allows differential movement to occur within your muscles and at your joints. Your fascia is your seam system, put simply. It's the thing that strings it all together.
So, with that being said, can our fascia be strung too tight?
Oh, for
or
sure.
Can it be, needing some hemming?
That's cute. That's awesome. You're the first can fascia be hemmed question I've ever had. So I'm going to hem and haw a little bit here. Yeah, so your fascia is also one of the primary repair systems for your body. So when you get an injury on the, deeper than the skin, let's go. We're going deep injury here. The fibroblasts, they migrate to the site along with, all these neutrophils and cytokines and all sorts of stuff to your immune system. Get in there. But the fibroblasts migrate there so that they can spit out collagen so that blood vessels can grow and help bring the supplies there. So the fibroblasts are the wound repair system that you have in your body. Isn't that cool? But if the wound is very, very significant and it doesn't end up repairing itself, well, you're repaired, you're healed, that's amazing. But sometimes when the wound is very, very significant, we have overzealous fibroblastic activity and we overproduce collagen, and that ends up leaving nodules or scars or agglomerations that end up not allowing for good glide or good movement within a certain area of our muscle or joint or whatever the injury was. And so those gnarls in your fascial fabric tend to make you have to accommodate movement around them. And we get these movement dams in our body caused by excessive collagen production, right? Scar tissue. Can we hem it? Well, the hemming is through different processes of massage or very, very intense friction to help improve glide in the area. But the friction can also be actually very, very gentle, long, steady traction. Very similar to actually one of the decompressive exercises that we did. So there are a variety of ways to address the hemming and the remodeling in a scar zone or a gnarl zone or an agglomeration. We used to call this adhesions, but this is bigger than an adhesion. This is really kind of a burr that's stuck within your soft tissues that's creating movement dysfunction and can definitely lead to pain. So yes, you can hem, but it's a little bit more, not like going in there and trimming it with scissors is going to make it better. Because if we go in there and trim it with scissors, we have new scars that we have to deal with.
There's obviously a lot of therapies today that say that they're targeting the fascia.
Sure.
Is that something that we're kind of just automatically doing when we're engaging with massage, self-massage?
100%.
Utilizing therapy balls and things like that.
You're never not addressing your fascia by rolling on a foam roller, by scrubbing with a yoga tune-up ball, by using not a chisel. What are those? Bump, the guns.
The therapy guns?
Yeah, they're working on all the systems. But it's helpful to be able to differentiate and discern which system you really want to impact the most, and then what those results are. So I also wrote a chapter in a medical textbook called Fascia Function and Medical Applications. During the 8 years it took to write this book, I took a year off to write for this medical textbook, and I wrote a chapter on self-myofascial release. So this is really a very near and dear topic to my heart. And the theme of self-myofascial release in research, the very first research paper, I think popped up in 1990 or 1991. It's a very, very young field. In fact, palpation science is only 150 years old in terms of, all sciences. Like there's more science on, nuclear stuff than there is on palpation science. That's mind-boggling, right? On radiation, excuse me, not nuclear, but radiation. I'm thinking about Marie Curie. She's one of my favorites. So palpation science is relatively new science. Self-myofascial release is even newer. And so it is very interesting to see what are tool-based interventions doing. We don't know all the things, but there's a few things that we definitely can see are happening with tool-based work.
This all brings it back to understanding that we're operating within this container, essentially. You said earlier, our meat suit. But within this, there's room for expansion. There's room for awareness to help to get things back online, to help to make sure that things are gliding correctly and communicating correctly. The biggest thing that inhibits this, and this is a big umbrella statement, is stress. And obviously there are a tremendous amount of stress inputs that, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual stress. But we have an overall stress load that you address in the book. And again, when we're just like throwing that weighted blanket on this stuff and not addressing these stressors, stuff is just building up. And eventually, of course, we're going to have a breakdown in the system. Like going 0 to 60, if we don't have an intentional strategy today more than ever to go 60 to 0 to recover, life is going to hit us with something that just is like, oh, you're going to sit your ass down over here, right? It's going to make you do the thing, right? But we can proactively put ourselves in a healthier position. And so this is leading to the conversation I want to talk to you about, which is about our positions.
Oh, okay.
Because earlier when we talked about posture,
yes,
and it hit me like a ton of bricks reading that section, that the way that we move our bodies, the shapes that we put our bodies in, inherently control the way that we're breathing. Deeper now, we understand it's inherently in controlling what's happening with our diaphragm and its ability to be a robust Arnold. We want some strength to this muscle, right? And obviously a lot of our postures today are not very advantageous, right? We're going into this kind of hunchback vibe, looking into our phones all day or at the computers. And so you are demonstrating through the book and even giving visuals and visual cues about fixing our posture. Now, here's a statement that you said, and again, this sounded like audacious.
Oh boy.
Being that our posture is essentially a home base from which all of our movements emanate, you said this. You say that posture is one of the easiest things to correct. That's a statement right there.
It's so funny hearing my quotes. All right. So one of the ways I break down posture in the book as it relates to breathing specifically, because this book is not going to teach you about your hip joints and your knees and your ankles and your feet position like the role model does. This book is really concerned with your axis. It's really concerned with the pathway of respiration and then its ripple effect everywhere. I break respiration down into 3 zones. And I think this is very helpful to understand posture. So there are 3 zones of respiration. In zone 1, we're focused on the stuff below the respiratory diaphragm. So as mentioned, the diaphragm lives in the lower 6 ribs. It attaches to the lumbar spine. On its way to attaching to the lumbar spine, it crosses across 2 of the most pivotal postural muscles known to the human body. That is the psoas major and the quadratus lumborum. So those are some big muscle names if you're not familiar with muscle anatomy, but the psoas is a gigantic hip flexor that starts at your high inner thigh, and it hooks into every one of your lumbar vertebra, your low back vertebra, and its discs, and then it threads its way to the very bottom of your thoracic spine, the the rib cage spine. So we've got a muscle that tethers the diaphragm that's going from thigh to thorax. That's a lot of territory that you're inhabiting with just that one muscle, all right? And the diaphragm is connecting to it. We also have the quadratus lumborum, which is a wider squatter muscle that connects the top of your pelvis to your lumbar spine. And again, it's hooking into the diaphragm. So if we look at zone 1 as having this, I mean, every zone has these musculoskeletal components, but we have this tremendous lumbar spine component. You did a bunch of stuff out there on the map that helped to mobilize those tissues that I just named. Add a third into the mix. The diaphragm that lives inside your rib cage, its fascial downstairs neighbor is a muscle called the transversus abdominis. The fascia of the transversus abdominis, the transversus abdominis is your cummerbund muscle. Looks like a cummerbund. And you use it every time you exhale, you use it when you cough, you use it when you sneeze. It's that muscle that compresses. If you want to look skinny, usually you tighten your cummerbund muscle, you tighten your transversus abdominis muscle. And when you do that, by the way, and you could even hear it in my voice, when you tighten the stuff below the diaphragm, it's going to narrow my ability for my diaphragm to move down when I breathe. Let me rephrase that. The zone 1 is the stuff below the diaphragm. When you have a relaxed and open zone 1, your diaphragm can easily descend on inhale and then pop back up into the rib cage on exhale. Your diaphragm should be able to move down and up just like a trampoline, and your gut area should expand and then fall in. You should have enough elasticity in the zone 1 that when you breathe in correctly, there's going to be bloat, not just because your belly pooches out, but your waist, your low back, even your pelvic floor. There's a transference of pressure. As the diaphragm descends circumferentially, I get this sphere action happening below it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But if I have tension or restriction in my transversus abdominis because I want to look skinny, or I'm bracing for a punch all the time, or I've got hip pain, or I've got low back pain, and I've got tension in those muscles, it is going to inhibit the full range of motion of my diaphragm into that zone 1 area. Zone 1 breathing is our most calming, recovery-based, parasympathetic, dominant style of breathing. When I breathe into my gut and allow the gut to expand and then allow it to fall in, my diaphragm is experiencing its full ease of contraction. There's nothing that it's having to push against in the contraction phase of inhale, right? It's not inhibited. If I inhibit my diaphragm in zone 1 by tensing, then I'm going to breathe into zone 2. Zone 2 breathing is a coordination between the intercostals, which move the ribs, and the diaphragm, which is living in the rib cage. So when I'm doing zone 2 breathing, I've got ribs that are pumping up and down. That's a great thing, right? I want to have these bony fish gills moving out and in and helping to pull air into the lungs and get air out. But typically when we're in our zone 2 breathing, we're in a more aroused, active, heightened state. We use this in athleticism all the time. You have to brace zone 1, steel your guts in order to, lift something heavy. Otherwise, your low back will go out, or you'll strain an SI joint. I have to stiffen my zone 1 in order to have a successful push, pull, thrust action, right? It's what we're using to stabilize. So the breath has to go somewhere. It's got to go into zone 2, which is more active, more sympathetic. Now, the third zone of respiration is zone 3. Zone 3 is the stuff that happens in the head, neck, face, collarbones, and shoulders. And I use a zone 3 breath in case of emergency, in high fright or fear, in delight. But it's not tenable. It's not an enduring breath. It's something that I need short, explosive, emergency, or thrill. But if I breathe like that all the time, I'm probably in shock. I'm having an asthma attack, and eventually I'll probably pass out because your body just can't sustain that, right? And so if I'm using my zone 3 muscles to do respiration, I'm going to have neck pain, shoulder pain, range of motion challenges with my shoulder, neck. I might even have chronic jaw pain, teeth grinding. So we see these sort of maladies of zone 3 that are sometimes associated with very high stress, high chronic stress, right? Because some stress is good, right? We're talking, when Shawn and I are talking about stress, we're talking about the diabolical stress, the stuff we're not recovering from, right? That buildup in the system. So the zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, I think is really helpful for people to be able to see, I want my diaphragm to move really well in zone 1 and zone 2. I don't want my muscles of zone 3 to be the thing that pull air in and day out, because they're not designed to do that. It's very costly metabolically. I want to use my lower metabolic cost muscles to do my breathing for me. And then in case of absolute emergency, obviously, you want your zone 3 stuff to kick in. How does it relate to posture? Well, your spine is a channel through like a maypole, within a maypole. So if the diaphragm is this skirt, then we've got this spine that's also helping to optimize the behavior of the diaphragm, right? If I'm rounding forward at my computer all day, it's going to create distortions in zone 3, especially because I'm gripping here. So what I'm showing is I'm gripping, if you're listening to this, I'm gripping a mouse or I'm gripping a keypad. I have tension going through the fascia of my hand, wrist, forearm, elbow, shoulder, all the way up to my face, cheek, eyeballs that are creating that cast, if I use my friend Katie Bowman's term, a cast of a zone 3 breather day in and day out. So we do have to do things, I think, on the regular to make sure that we're decomposing the tensions in zone 3 so that we can get to a more balanced zone 1, zone 2 for our overall output.
This is essentially medicine for the stressors in our lives, being able to access that parasympathetic through this. Again, it's an innately, we all have access to it. But in this case today, more than ever, we might need some training. And being able to push these different buttons, whether it's through our breathing or whether it's through manipulation of, certain spots on our bodies, which you walk us through in the book, body by breath. This is helping to reduce that overall stress load and just being able to ratchet down so that we're getting access to more resilience. Now, this is the last thing I want to ask you about, because you did bring it up when you talked about resilience in the book. What we tend to think about is being tough, being able to endure. That's what resilience just on the surface is. Even for me, as I was reading it, just like, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. But then you articulate that resilience is truly, if we're looking at what it really means, resilience is the ability to bounce back. Let's talk about that.
Oh, you are your own best hero. I mean, you need to be your own hero, especially today, right? You have to advocate for your hopes and dreams, your family. And it's very difficult to have to always be the lead and be the leader and not take the time to refuel yourself and your cells. You can't keep filling if you don't empty. And we tend to run to depletion and then just hope that we can get more energy instead of actually doing the work of truly refilling our souls and our pitchers and our physiology. It's actually very, very simple to do that refill. And I outlined it in the book. It's called the 5 Ps of the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the ability to build a tolerance for parasympathetic state. Many of us are running because we're running from something or we're afraid of something. The ability to not just to stop and be still, because stillness can be terrifying to many bodies, especially bodies that are running scared, or running toward. It's not just running scared, we're also running toward. We have ambitions, we have goals. There's this phenomenon called relaxation-induced anxiety that I discovered a few decades ago, and it just stuck with me. I was like, wow, relaxation-induced anxiety. That's the phenomenon when you start to go into relaxation states where you start to get anxious about letting go, about your vulnerability. Sometimes I see in the classroom when people go into Shavasana or corpse pose, at the end of the class, they can't be still. They're fidgeting, their eyes are opening and closing. That's when the pain starts to set in for some people. When they start to get still, when they're finally still, all of the things that have been submerged during all the action, it becomes visible, it's uncomfortable, it's untenable. Relaxation-induced anxiety, there's some estimates that between 17 and 53% of people experience this, which I think is why meditation hasn't really stuck in the general population, because it's uncomfortable. So how do we help bodies that seem meditation resistant or relaxation resistant? How do we help them to find a way to refill? And I think these 5 Ps are a really good formula to help not only those bodies, but the bodies that like stillness too. And the 5 Ps are, number 1 is perspective. And perspective has to do with mindset. Like mindset, and those are throughout the book. In Body by Breath, I have dozens of them. But one of them is, all of me is welcome here. That includes the anxious part of me, the part that can't sit still. You're welcome here too. Come here, fidgeter. We're going to hang. You want to fidget? Let's fidget. The second P is place. Ideally, to truly relax, the place needs to be safe. Now, in the throes of a stress moment, and that can happen, on the street, it can happen on an airport, it can happen, on the airplane. I was on the airplane yesterday hitting a lot of turbulence. I was like, okay, this is a safe place. Didn't believe it at all, right? But I had to go through, I was like, okay, let me think of the physics of clouds and airflow and the airplane wings. I had to go there to make the place safe for me. So ideally, the place is sanctuary-like. It's where you feel at peace. And that could be outside, it could be inside. For true relaxation, physiologically, it should be warm, it should be a little bit dark, it should be quiet. The third P is position. And I don't mean posture. Position, in terms of your physiology, where you're going to find the greatest relaxation response, is on the ground, is laying down, or slightly in a gentle slope, a little bit reclined. So there are a number of positions you'll see throughout Body by Breath where I have the pelvis is lifted up on a block or on a gorgeous ball, so that you create what's known as the baroreceptor reflex in your body. And that helps the vagus nerve to come online and tamp down on sympathetic outflow. So you've got perspective, place, position. Now the fourth P, we didn't even get to this till now, is pace of breath. So pace of breath is how you're organizing those breath reps that you asked me about so early in our conversation. Ideally, your exhale is longer than your inhale. Now, there are paradoxical breath strategies you can do where you load your inhale, but for the just grand scheme, your exhales are longer than your inhale. That helps the vagus nerve to come online. And then the fifth P is palpation. Obviously, I use role model balls, but palpation means you are using something or even your own hands to press, to conform into different spots on your body. And ideally, there are these spots within the axis that I identify that are these kind of vagal portals of pressure that really help the vagus to also become more and more dominant, and to quiet the sympathetic nervous system, to quiet these unknown braces, these unknown barriers to relaxation. And so that's kind of the recipe.
I love it. The recipe is effective and it's attainable for all of us. And thank you for giving us these access keys. Can you let everybody know where they can pick up Body by Breath and also follow you, get more into your universe?
Yeah, Body by Breath is on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. You can get it everywhere. Get it at your local bookstore. We love seeing it on bookshelves. It's a heavy book. Just be prepared. It's 4.3 pounds.
It's a great table book. It's a great book just to have sitting around. It's beautiful.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then you can find me online. My website is tuneupfitness.com. I do courses in person and online. I have a number of trainings that are available online. Like I mentioned, I have one with Katie Bowman. I have one with my friend Kelly Starrett. I even have one with Tom Myers, who many consider the oracle of fascia. And you can also find online classes with me. I have an online classroom where I do 30-minute to hour-long classes every week, and I have a mentor group. There's also teachers that teach body by breath, yoga tune-up, and role model work all over the world. If you go to our website, you type in your zip code, you can find them. And then I'm on Instagram at the Jill Miller.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
What if I told you these are diseases of skeletal muscle first? And that obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease begin in skeletal muscle first. Insulin resistance begins in skeletal muscle first. And if we care about root cause medicine, then we have to care about skeletal muscle.